session where we're going to talk about achieving energy independence for India by 2047. Why 2047? 100 years of India's independence, right? Let me introduce the panelists. All of them, all the four individuals here are very well known. I'll not spend a lot of time introducing them. They're all also sitting right under their names, so you know who's who. Starting from my left, Mr. Tarun Kapoor. He's the advisor to the Prime Minister in the PMO's office. Mr. Dammu Ravi, Secretary, Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs. Mr. Sashi Mukandan, President BP India and Senior VP BP Group. And Dr. Steve Moore, Deputy CEO at Cairn Oil Gas. So we have a really good representation here from the policy making side as well as from the industry side. And major private players, of course, in the Indian upstream sector, BP and Cairn. So we're going to get started. And I will start with Sashi, if that's all right.
Okay.
Your company, in a strategic alliance with Reliance, has recently brought on stream a major natural gas field in India last year. And we heard this morning Prime Minister Modi say that the aim for India is to increase the share of natural gas in the primary energy mix from 6% to 15% by 2030. And let's just remind ourselves, 2030 is not too far away, right? Just 6 years away. But let's take a step back. I'd love to hear about your experience with the MJ field as well, but let's take a step back. If I start by asking you, what are the major challenges that you see in terms of India moving towards energy independence by 2047?
Thank you, Vandana. So the way I would think about is, India is obviously an economy on steroids, right? I mean, we are growing at 7% a year. Things are moving pretty fast. We need energy to make it happen. We need all forms of energy to make that happen. Because we cannot choose at this point in time what energy we're going to use, because we need energy, it has to be accessible, it has to be affordable, and in the long run, it has to be sustainable. And what I like about this government is thinking very responsibly when they talk about energy. And when this Prime Minister and this government says we want to get to energy independence by 2047, it basically means we need to work this carefully across, which is very similar to how BP is thinking about the world, right? I mean, we are not saying we're going to switch from oil and gas straight to, renewables or other things. We believe that you need both the conventional energy, oil and gas of today, and you need the energy of the future, and you got to build the energy systems of the future, and you got to bring it to an affordable level, and then you can switch. And that is what I'm seeing, what is happening in this country, right? Yes, you also have coal in India, so it's going to be oil, gas, and coal, which is fine. But, what you're doing is you're trying to balance both to get to the right place. Then, you will have some people who will turn around and say, okay, isn't that too ambitious? Can you do this? How do you think you'll really get there? It's possible. It's possible because you just have to be very systematic about how you do it. We did a stress test case, which basically said, okay, what will it take to get to, energy independence by 2047? And we said, firstly, you got to convert everything that can run on electricity needs to be converted to be run on electricity, which basically means by 2047, almost 50% of all your electricity, all your energy demand will be electricity. Okay. In addition to that, you've got to start thinking about how do you work some of the alternate fuels, right? Which is biofuels and everything else. This will take a lot of effort, but as the Indian economy grows, we have the power, we've got the money, which will allow us to do it. It is a big call because by the time you get into the 2040s, you may have to build 200, 250 gigawatts a year of power. there are countries which are doing it. So, it's not that we can't do it. So I'm a strong believer that, if we get our policies right, if we put the right framework in place, and if private and public sectors work together in partnership, anything is possible.
Thank you very much for that. So, Steve, Cairn is the biggest private crude producer in India, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure you can relate to quite a lot of what Sashi talked about, like India will continue to need fossil fuels. I keep also hearing and reading that while India's crude and condensate production has been going down, but India still has quite a bit of untapped geological potential to continue raising its oil and gas production. Um, what set of factors or characteristics do you think will enable India to continue developing its untapped potential?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm new to India, but India has a huge potential. One of the reasons for me coming here is because of the large potential and also the need that India has for hydrocarbon reserves for many years to come. It's obviously got a very commendable program of renewables, world-leading position in renewables and loads of potential, but you're going to need hydrocarbons for a long time. So to me, three things are important. We have to really exploit all of the resources, and I think the government's doing a fantastic job of opening new exploration acreage. Got a very progressive licensing round. Cairn has obviously competed heavily and picked up a lot of good blocks. We've had some discoveries and we managed to get production from one, and the second one will be coming on stream in the next couple of days in Rajasthan. So exploration, I think, the government could follow the lead of Norway and make all exploration costs fully recoverable from taxes across a company's acreage position rather than in the acreage. So they would get a lot more exploration wells drilled. And without exploration, we can't really unlock the huge potential that is there. Second, I think India needs to make sure it's really utilizing all its surface assets, a little bit like the UK at the moment, trying to, before the surface assets are decommissioned, find the smaller fields around them, tie them back. Again, the DSF rounds, the OALP to a degree are doing that. And we're actively pursuing that both on the East Coast and the West Coast with Cairn, and obviously in Rajasthan, where we have our big facilities. So that's going well. I think the third area that we all have to do is we have to seriously get our recovery factors up from the fields that have already been discovered, because the average recovery in India is relatively low compared to what I'm used to in Oman, for example, or in the UK, or even in the States, where people are really incentivized to move into secondary recovery, move into tertiary. At the moment we're studying Cairn. I think Cairn prides itself to be a technically advanced company. We've got the world's biggest polymer project. It's getting us up to 40%, 45% recovery in difficult fields in Rajasthan, where we want to move in and do surfactant flooding, get it up to 60%. We want to recover the CO2 from our gas and go to CO2 flooding. And I think the government could support us to do that in two ways. One, rather than increase taxes when PSCs are extended, we need to see what other parts of the world are doing, reduce taxes because those projects become, each project that you do becomes less and less economic because the dollars per barrel goes up. Still very economic for India, but not economic for the investors. And also these are very big projects that go on for many years. So PSCs have to be extended, not for 5 years or 10 years, but really for as long as there's commercial production. And then we could put in the billions of dollars that we need to invest to get recoveries up to the 65, 70%, which I think is achievable in a lot of our field, and bring in absolutely the best technology in the world from wherever it is and apply it in India.
Thank you. Let's bring that discussion to policy, Tarun. So India has to balance energy security, affordability, transition, and now also talking about energy independence. That's a lot of challenges as well as opportunities in policy making. How do you marry all of these imperatives? Do you see a tension anywhere, or do you think it's possible to move on all these fronts together?
So for us, it is a difficult task because India is a very price sensitive market. So if we say start supplying energy at a price which is high, then no one will buy it. One example was that during COVID, the price of LNG went to 30, 40, $50. And while we have this target of taking our primary energy contribution coming from gas to 15%, it actually went down. So we went down from 6.7% to about 6.1% because we couldn't just import at a price which was way above our affordable price range. So there are certain areas where it becomes like a must buy kind of a situation. For example, fertilizers. You have to produce fertilizers, whatever is the price. You can't afford to not supply fertilizer to your farming sector. So there we had to buy. But then in certain other areas like all our gas-based power generation plants shut down because we can't produce power and sell it like Europe did. Suddenly price of energy went up. Still people went buying. That if we look from India's point of view, it's madness. How can you start paying 10 times the price for energy? It doesn't happen. So which means that we have to have alternatives. So if we are linked to the global supply, what we've seen is that the global markets are very volatile, be it gas, oil, but domestic markets you can keep them at a particular level, and you can maintain a price which would be more linked to the cost of production and allow a certain kind of a markup without controlling. Like I'm not saying that we fix the price and ask everyone to sell at that price. All I'm saying is that you have policies that ensure that the market volatility is limited. So, so when we talk of independence, energy independence, then I think that volatility issue will also get addressed to a large extent. So I was just discussing with someone just now that 50% of the the oil and oil trading 50 times the actual exchange of product, 50 times that is just on paper.
Yes.
So the speculative buying and selling is 50 times the actual buying and selling. So that's what makes the whole market very volatile. And those who do this forget that there are consumers at the end of the chain who can't afford that. So in India, when we talk of independence, we are also talking of bringing a regime where the price doesn't go totally haywire. So in our say domestic gas, for example, so we have APM, which is the administered price mechanism, where now we've said that there will be a lower price cap and upper price cap, and within that the price can fluctuate. So which means that even the producer shouldn't have a fear that he will have to sell at a price which will be lower than the price at which he produces. Similarly, for another category which we call the high pressure, high temperature, we again have an upper limit. That upper limit is quite high, so which means that cost of production is very well covered. But then it does cut that volatility price going to say $30 an oil. So now as the domestic production goes up, our dependence on that volatile part will keep reducing. I'm just talking of gas to make things clearer. So because that gas was the sector where we saw the maximum volatility. So in gas, we had gas coming from the domestic production. We had gas coming from long-term contracts, where those contracts were linked to the oil price, and the volatility was relatively lesser, and some purchases had to be done on the spot. So that spot thing almost vanished during COVID because the price went up. But the others made us stay on, and at least the basic needs could be fulfilled. Now I think time has come for the world to think of long-term contracts even for oil. To think of contracts where there is a formula which ensures that there is a say 10-year contract. Supposing we have a 10-year contract, so the buyer knows that he is going to get that supply for 10 years, and there could be upper limit, there could be a lower limit, so the price can fluctuate within that limit. It won't go anywhere.
That's
So can we do that? So if we can do that, then I think we have the answer.
that's a very interesting suggestion, and I think a good segue to Ravi. So, as External Affairs Ministry, you are in the hot seat now because the intertwining of India's energy needs from the external markets and geopolitics is now so tight. So, my question to you, Ravi, is how does India balance this? Being able to get reliable energy supply and managing its external relations from a geopolitical point of view.
Well, thank you, Vandana. And first of all, let me express my gratitude and appreciation to be part of the distinguished panel here. Let me address that question in somewhat three parts. Geopolitical tensions in recent times have really disrupted the oil supply chains, and that's causing a great turmoil on the global markets. But a country like ours, with a huge burden of having to take care of 1.4 billion people, you have to navigate these difficult times. So what India has done is precisely that. You go to countries where you can actually get the supplies. So Russia happens to be a major country now, which is supplying the oil. But we have always maintained one point of view very clearly, that we respect the UN sanctions. That's important. But if individual countries sanctions, we have to navigate it. I know there are difficulties, but of the repercussions that it may have, but we have managed it well. I think this is what any country will do. I mean, look at what the Western countries are today, where their dependence on the gas-based energy production, switching to LNG. So in a similar way, what India is doing is what many countries would do, and our development imperatives would make it incumbent on the government to ensure that the supplies are steady into the future. Now, domestically also, we have done a significant amount of work in the renewable space. One is the 500 gigawatts of renewables in the solar and wind, then you have green hydrogen mission, then biofuels, ethanols. Now, all of this also have an external bearing because you need technologies. You need to also ensure that the critical minerals that feed into this and support this activity have to be secured. And that's where I feel is the diplomacy comes in. In the Ministry of External Affairs, we take it upon us the responsibility to ensure that these supply chains are resilient and we are able to maintain these supplies continuously. Look at what we did with the Mineral Security Partnership. Again, this is looking into the future, the critical minerals that actually support the renewables energy, we need to ensure that these are in our hands at some stage or the other. In the oil sector, we have done very well. We have secured a lot of assets outside, but in the case of minerals, we are just beginning to do that. And I believe this is in the entire game of our vision to secure energy independence by 2047. This constitutes a major operation. But I'll tell you again, no country can be truly independent by itself. I think what is important is how confident are you to be able to secure the supply chains, and that is able to be feeding into your economic activity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sashi, let me get back to you on, you mentioned you did a simulation of what if India were to completely electrify its economy. Now, right now, India is quite heavily reliant on coal for electricity generation. So in that sort of scenario, if more and more of India's energy consumption moves towards electricity, what is the answer to do it sustainably and continue with the decarbonization goals? Is natural gas the answer? Is hydrogen the answer? Is renewables the answer? How do you see that progressing?
So I would start, Vandana, by saying that all of the above, we're not going to be using just one or the other, or you can't just switch one off, right? What you've got to do is you've got to look at ways where you can optimize things. I mean, if you just look at energy efficiency in the last 10 years, we've seen almost 2.5% reduction in energy consumption because of that. Going out, we think you could even do better than that. If I can get 3% energy efficiency, which means by 2047 I would need, my energy consumption would be a third lesser than what I would have had otherwise. So, that's one area to do that. You will need gas, but like Mr. Kapoor said, you've got the volatility of the price because most of your gas is imported.
Yeah.
Yes, we have reduced our imports. I mean, in the last 3 years, we have brought on 3 fields in KG Basin. We're producing almost 30 million standard cubic meters a day, or roughly a billion cubic feet. That, if you look at it, that's roughly a third today of India's gas production that's coming from that field. So there are projects like that going on, but you will still need to look at the alternate energy. And if I look at things like solar, and if I look at it over the last decade, costs have come down over 30-35%. So today you are able to compete, with solar, with even coal, can even do better than coal. Yes, you have the intermittency issue, right, which we need to deal with. Same thing goes with wind. Wind has been, by indigenizing things, you're able to bring down the cost of wind, electricity from wind. So these are things that will happen, on hydrogen, yes, today hydrogen is very challenged, but there are so many companies in India that are doing research, looking at what they can do with an electrolyzer. And if we can really indigenize it, put all our might and effort behind it, because the scale, if I can get it right in India, the scale is huge, right? I can see just hard to abate sectors by 2030 using at least 5 million tons of hydrogen. There's not many places in the world where you're going to see that. And this is assuming India's steel production continues the way it is. I know India's steel industry is going to be one of the hugely growing industries in the world. And it's going to supply most of the world. You will need green steel for it. So every sector is working in India towards getting better. So I feel, there is a way to get there. But yes, you still need to have gas and oil and coal. And I think you will still have some residual of these, but majority you will be able to probably switch over.
Sure. Steve, one of the ways for India to exploit all its geological potential to produce oil and gas is, of course, to continue looking at new areas to develop new fields. But another one is through enhanced oil recovery from existing fields. And I know, for instance, that Cairn has looked quite closely at this technology to extract the maximum possible from existing fields. Share with us some of your experience and what are some of the enablers you think in using more EOR in existing fields in India?
Okay, yeah, as I said in the answer to the first question, EOR tertiary recovery techniques are critical for any country, and particularly for India that has a lot of quite complex reservoirs. If we just use primary development techniques or water flooding, we don't get large recoveries. We leave more oil behind in the ground than we've extracted. So Cairn has been pioneering various recovery techniques. Our main focus has been on polymer flooding. Polymer is quite simple. You just add a polymer to the water to make it more viscous, and it helps push the oil out, and you can get recovery up because the viscosity difference between the water and the oil becomes lower. That has a finite limit. You get 45, 48%, still less than half of the recovery. You spend a lot of money. And one of the things we're looking at in Cairn is, while we're doing that, how can we make value out of the polymer? The polymer is oil, actually. It's oil in a different format. So we're doing research at the moment of how we can take the polymer out of the water and then reuse the polymer. And one of the things we're looking at reusing is actually to burn the polymer in a specialist piece of equipment that generates carbon dioxide at pressure. 35, 40 bar, and then allows us to re-inject that carbon dioxide back into the reservoir. Carbon dioxide is a fantastic fluid for getting a lot of oil out of reservoirs. So if we can take the polymer, cycle the polymer around, reuse the polymer, instead of being a waste, it becomes a feedstock, not only for CO2, but generating clean, totally clean energy, green energy. Then we use the CO2, we can get another 20% recovery from the CO2. Now, CO2 works in deep reservoirs. In the shallow reservoirs, our focus is on using surfactants. Surfactant is nothing different than washing liquid. You wash your plates with washing liquid. We want to wash the reservoirs with washing liquid. Washes the oil off your plates, washes the oil out of reservoirs. Theoretically, both CO2 and surfactant, if you put it through a piece of rock, it contacts the oil, you get 100% of the oil out. It's all about spacing of the wells, how many times you cycle it around, but you can extract everything out of a reservoir. So we're working on both of those. Obviously, the byproduct of all of this is that we're going to generate a lot of power from our waste. And from that power, we're looking also in Rajasthan particularly, how to use that excess power. Obviously, we can back out power from the grid. We can achieve our goal of getting to net CO2 by the end of this decade or not earlier. But we can also use that excess power to generate hydrogen, green hydrogen. If we're going to use oxycombustion, we generate nitrogen as a waste product. We produce hydrogen and nitrogen, we can produce ammonia. So we can produce green ammonia as a side product. I think the oil and gas industry, as it transitions, will transition into an industry that's working with more than hydrocarbon gases. It's going to work with CO2, it's going to work with hydrogen, it's going to work with oxygen, it's going to work with nitrogen. We're going to make methanol, we're going to make ethanol, we're going to make ammonia. We're going to help the transition to hydrogen as a primary fuel source. Obviously, I think nobody in the oil industry likes burning oil. Oil is such a precious resource. We should be making things out of oil that we can recycle, not burning it and making CO2. So that's the position in Cairn. We're doing everything we can to really drive recovery up and really help the country in its mission to become energy independent.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you. Tarun, the past COP28, COP27, we've seen a lot of pressure from especially environmentalists and some of the Western governments that countries should just start phasing out all fossil fuels, stop coal use, even phase out oil and gas. Now, as India thinks of its energy independence, but also sustainable transition, reliability, affordability, do you think it's possible for a country like India, looking out into 2047, to wean itself of coal, oil, and gas? And if not wean itself completely, what are the most obvious alternatives that you can see in at least reducing its footprint on coal use, for instance?
This is again an important debate, and the wording now is phase down of unabated. We insist on fossil fuel. Some countries say coal. So, but in the last COP, fossil fuel has come in that declaration. So, now it is important to understand what is the meaning of this sentence and what developing countries like India, what is their action plan. So on one side we have the developed world where they've already peaked, and in any case their energy demand has to now either go down or it will remain at the same level. So if they put in more renewables, so phasing down automatically happens, because that renewable is going to in any case replace some fossil fuel. In our case, our energy demand is going to keep growing. Our per capita is not even half of the per capita of the world. Our per capita, if you compare with say countries like US, is maybe 1/15th or something like that. So and even if supposing we think that we will reach the level at which China's per capita is today, still we have quite far to go, and at least that to get to that energy level, our growth is going to be probably much, or growth in energy demand is going to be faster than our addition in renewables or biofuels. So, which means that we've not peaked as far as fossil fuels are concerned. But then we also have a concern of whatever be the pressure from the world or the developed countries, we also have to look at our own, we have to look at our energy needs on one side, but we also are conscious about the environment. So it's not that we indiscriminately want to start using too much coal if we have alternatives. So we have now, I would say, two pathways which both we have to follow. One is we increase the renewable energy capacity and we shift as much as possible from molecule to electron, which means that we shift the grid as much as possible. So, more electric vehicles, more industry shifting to electric, and our grid becoming greener. So, that path is very clear. It's easier, and we'll do that. Now, the other part is wherever we still have to use fossil fuel. For example, in some industry, say cement production, steel production, maybe green hydrogen comes in, becomes cheaper, and we are able to fire our furnaces and all with green hydrogen, or there are some other alternatives which come up. Then, and it happens fast, then we are ready for it. But if it doesn't happen, then maybe some amount of coal will still go, and maybe we set up more steel plants, so we may need little more coal. And it may also happen that there may be some shift on the transport side to electric or hydrogen, but there may still be somewhere where we have to continue to use diesel. We'll try to shift as much as possible to natural gas. It's a little bit cleaner. Do blending with biogas, do blending with hydrogen, but then still maybe a little bit of usage of diesel and petrol would continue. So now, what do we do about this? So the other path is to make the fossil fuel as clean as possible. So carbon capture is, I think, very important for us. So uh, we have to put full efforts in R&D. We have to put full efforts in setting up commercial scale plants, even if it is expensive. Put money wherever possible, even government money if need be, and try to clean up this fossil fuel sector as much as possible. And I'm quite sure that we will have good technological breakthroughs soon. And we are right now, just few days back, the government took a decision to put in huge amounts of government money for coal gasification. And with coal gasification, then we may think of carbon capture, and we may think of using coal in a cleaner form. So both these things we will follow: cleaning up the fossil fuel part and getting more and more renewables.
Okay. Staying on the same topic, Ravi, so the Global South is looking at India for leadership on how to achieve a just, orderly, equitable transition. How do you think, what is India's message to the Global South in terms of transitioning?
Thank you very much for asking that question. Now, let me look at it from a very broad angle. The G20 presidency of India and the theme of it captures very well: one earth, one family, one future. And also underlying that theme is no one to be left behind. So that is what is captured, the spirit of India, in which we take up the global challenge, global South challenges. Now, how do we go about it? I think the first important thing is we have to understand that there is a need for narrative building. The narrative building, which is coming down from the Western perspective, has always believed in emission caps, and it believed about controlling the how do you use your energy, those things. But I think there is an important aspect to it from the global South point of view is the energy and development are so interlinked concept. And energy and growth are so interlinked concepts. And what does Global South actually mean? It's two-thirds of the world community is actually Global South. And today, what India's leadership is trying to bring out is actually the narrative building from a development perspective. And second is the institution creation. I mean, look at the international solar alliances that we have created, the global biofuel alliances. You also have the LIFE, the green hydrogen mission. Now, all of this, you can talk about emission caps, but I think ultimately what you also need to look at it is the behavior. And that's what Prime Minister brought focus into the debate on in the debate on energy and the climate change. So now let's look at it. Most of the discussions in the energy space today, the international institutions talk about creating reports, creating data, monitoring countries' emission caps or emissions. But I think we need to go even more beyond that. What India can do is actually encourage entrepreneurship to take up projects outside of India. And I believe in the rise of India, in the economic rise of India, our entrepreneurship will become global. And it's eminently possible to create energy projects outside of India, including the renewable energies in gigawatt scale, the way we've done in India, and help countries in the energy transition. Now, of course, there are some issues there. You have to look at the energy market itself. Now, are you able to do a cross-border energy trading? And these challenges will come, but I think we should continue to engage with those countries to ensure that this is possible. Now, let's start with the South Asia itself, the neighborhood first policy of India. The best way to go about it is actually expand the scope of energy creation by Indian entrepreneurs within South Asia. So a common unified energy market in South Asia, while countries would still be independent, sovereign, politically sovereign and independent. That's possible because if you're able to create excess energy and surplus energy, then you're actually addressing the development challenges of the nation. And I see this framework eminently possible to replicate in Africa, because today Africa has about 1.4 billion people and nearly about 700 million people have no access to electricity. And that's where, as a leader of the Global South, India can get into that space of actually doing projects outside, commercially viable projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. So we have about 2.5 minutes left. What I'd like to request is all the four speakers to maybe think of, let's say, two key messages. Take about 45 seconds and two key messages that you would like our audience to leave this room with today. Sashi, please.
We talked a lot about the energy transition and how it will work and what will it take to get there. To me, if I've got just two things to say, one is we need to develop the skills that's needed for this transition as we start going into new areas. Secondly, I think we need to put a lot of effort together, both public, private companies and foreign companies getting together, thinking about research and development, about new technologies. Steve talked about existing technologies, what we can do. I think we should put all our might behind it. I think if we can do those two things, so it's skills development and more R&D.
Thank you. Steve?
Okay, I guess my two takeaways are, I think it's clear India is going to need hydrocarbons for a long time to come, and they're not going to vanish overnight. I think the world needs them, and there's a lot of governments that naively think they can switch hydrocarbons off. I think the Indian government understands exactly the importance. So I think that's a key takeaway. But we have to shift away from burning them. We have to shift away from polluting the environment with CO2. And I think the oil and gas industry has a huge role to play in that, because to me, CO2 sequestration, the use of CO2, particularly the use of CO2 to increase the amount of recoverable reserves in India from India's own reservoirs is absolutely critical. And it's tantamount to all of the companies, whether they're an independent company like Cairn or the public companies, to clean up, get to net zero, and support the transition to develop, because India's got fantastic potential for CO2 sequestration. Environmentalists tend to think it's cheating somehow, but it's not cheating. It's part of the the answer to the question that was obviously facing us all. So my two thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you. Tarun?
So one message as part of the energy industry, because I think everyone is from the energy sector. So we have to produce more energy within India, so all of us can contribute to that. So let's think of ways and means of increasing our domestic production. And message as consumers: consume as less energy as possible. So reduce whatever you consume.
Ravi?
Well, thank you. I think I'll very quickly emphasize that, while we are still focusing on the energy mix and the metrics of energy in the India's requirement will go up, but we have to be very clear that you cannot do away the fossil fuel need for your energy requirements. But how do you address that as you are transiting in the energy is you bring in responsibility in the way you address the fossil fuel energy sources. And that's where you require technologies. You got to ensure that the resilience of the supply chains are maintained. And you need to be able to do that, you need to have a lot of partners, both bilaterally and plurilaterally and multilaterally. And that's where diplomacy comes in. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Tarun Kapoor, Mr. Dammu Ravi, Mr. Sashi Mukandan, and Mr. Steve Ward. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.